Scotland's most photographed castle is barely a century old. Its most visited fortress conceals a medieval listening chamber designed for espionage. And beneath one of its most dramatic ruins, a woman smuggled the nation's crown jewels past Cromwell's occupying army in sacks of wool. You think you know this country, but from its iconic castles to its quietest corners, Scotland conceals layers most visitors never reach, and some of what remains hidden is now genuinely fragile. Edinburgh Castle dominates the volcanic crag above Scotland's capital, its stony silhouette familiar to millions of travellers. Yet behind the grand facades and military pageantry, the fortress functions as a highly engineered machine designed for ultimate survival. Records from Historic Environments Scotland trace this practical architecture to the very foundations of the stronghold, where survival depended on securing basic resources under fire. Deep within the rock lies the Four Well. As one of the oldest and most securely concealed structures within the castle gates, this medieval water catchment shaft served as the garrison's lifeline. During months of relentless siege, when the city below was cut off, this stone-lined cavity supplied the fresh water that kept defenders alive. But physical survival was only part of the castle's design. Internal security required constant vigilance. High in the timber-roofed Great Hall, a small barred aperture is cut directly into the solid stone. Known as Laird's Lug, this secret listening ear allowed the castle's governors to eavesdrop on conversations in the courtyard below without ever being detected. What appeared to be a decorative stone niche was actually a sophisticated tool of medieval espionage, built to intercept treason before it could breach the gates. These hidden survival systems show that Edinburgh's iconic fortress was more than a royal residence or a symbolic monument. It was a fortress built for the harsh realities of medieval warfare, where victory depended on water, stone, and whispered secrets, rather than grand cavalry charges. Travel westward from the volcanic crags of the capital, and the defensive architecture of Scotland shifts from city strongholds to the open water of the highlands. Here, Donan Castle sits at the meeting point of three sea locks, its arched stone bridge and isolated island footprint forming one of the most recognisable sights in the country. While this fortress traces its origins to the early 13th century, when it was first established to defend Kintail lands against Viking raids, the castle standing today is largely a modern creation. After being reduced to ruins during the Jacobite uprising of 1719, the structure lay abandoned for nearly 2 centuries. It was not until 1912 that Lieutenant Colonel John McCrae Gilstrap began a massive 20-year project to rebuild the stronghold. Yet, embedded within this 20th century reconstruction are quiet links to the past. On the east wall, hidden behind a later stone facade, lies a small interlaced letter M carved into the rock. This is the mason's mark of the Mackenzie clan, a human signature left by the historic builders who originally raised the walls. Further east, along the cold waters of Loch Ness, the shattered ruins of Urquhart Castle present a different kind of architectural secret. While visitors flock to the site for its sweeping views of the water, the remaining stone curtain walls contain highly specialised defensive features. Set low into the western wall of the Great Gatehouse is a narrow, angled gun port. This specific opening allowed medieval defenders to target hostile ships on the loch while remaining entirely protected from incoming fire. It is a precise, calculated design that transformed a scenic vantage point into a lethal trap, proving that the beauty of these Highland fortresses was always secondary to the brutal business of survival. On the sheer red cliffs near Stonehaven, Dunnottar Castle stands on a flat-topped rock surrounded by the cold waters of the North Sea. This precipitous stronghold, constructed from rugged conglomerate stone, was designed to withstand the most determined assaults. In the autumn of 1651, that defence was pushed to its limit when Oliver Cromwell's forces laid siege to the fortress. Cromwell sought to capture the honours of Scotland, the historic crown, sceptre, and sword that represented Scottish sovereignty. For 8 gruelling months, a tiny garrison of 70 defenders held out against the parliamentarian army. As the siege dragged into the spring of 1652 and heavy artillery arrived on the mainland cliffs, surrender became inevitable. The national treasures had to be smuggled out before the gates fell. Local accounts often celebrate Catherine Drummond for orchestrating a daring rescue, but parish records credit Christian Fletcher, the wife of the local minister. The defenders lowered the crown jewels down the sheer cliffside to a waiting boat on the beach below. Fletcher concealed the heavy royal regalia inside ordinary sacks of wool, carrying them directly through the English military lines without detection. The treasures found refuge at Kinneff Old Church, a quiet stone building a few miles down the coast. The minister, James Granger, and his wife buried the honours beneath the church floorboards, dampening the stone to hide the disturbed earth. For 9 years, the jewels remained buried, completely hidden from Cromwell's soldiers, until the monarchy was restored in 1660. The fortress eventually fell, but the secrets buried in the church floor preserved the symbols of a kingdom. Far north of the mainland cliffs, on the windswept edge of the Orkney archipelago, the passage of time undergoes a radical shift. Buried for millennia beneath coastal sand dunes lies Skara Brae. This stone-built Neolithic settlement was first occupied around 3180 BC, long before the first fortresses of the south were razed. For over 6 centuries, a small community lived in these subterranean dwellings, farming, fishing, and weathering the Atlantic storms, until they abandoned the site around 2500 BC. In contrast to the grand fortifications of the mainland, Skara Brae offers a quiet, intimate look at the daily rhythms of prehistoric home life. The preservation is so complete that the ancient inhabitants feel remarkably immediate. Inside the stone dwellings, slab-built beds, dressers, and central hearths remain exactly where they were assembled thousands of years ago. Nowhere is this human presence felt more keenly than in the structure known as House 7. During excavations, researchers found a broken animal tooth necklace scattered directly across the doorway, its beads left where they fell as someone hurried through the exit. Inside the same house, choice joints of meat were found left behind in the stone bed enclosures, the remains of a final meal prepared but never consumed. Though historical folklore favoured a single, catastrophic sandstorm that buried the village in an instant, modern evidence suggests a more gradual retreat. A shifting climate brought colder, wetter weather to Orkney, making life on the coast increasingly untenable, and driving a slow migration away from the dunes. Yet the scattered beads at the threshold and the untouched food in House 7 preserve a haunting moment of departure, leaving a personal record of the families who once lived here. The sheer, dark peaks of Glen Coe rise abruptly from the highland floor, forming a massive, ice-sculpted U-shaped glacial valley, first carved by glaciers during the last ice age. Here the terrain itself serves as a witness to history, where the geology does not merely frame tragedy, but holds it. On the freezing, storm-swept night of the 13th of February, 1692, this ancient geological trough became a lethal trap. Government troops under the Earl of Argyll's regiment of foot, who had been accepted into the homes of the resident MacDonald clan under the sacred Highland custom of hospitality, turned on their hosts. Acting on orders from the Williamite administration to enforce an oath of allegiance to the new monarchs, William and Mary, the soldiers systematically attacked the families who had fed and sheltered them. The harsh winter weather intensified the horror of the betrayal. Freezing winds tunneled through this narrow corridor, where average winter wind speeds reached 39 miles per hour. That night, the storm carried the sound of gunfire and screams up the sheer granite walls of the Three Sisters Peaks. About 30 MacDonalds were killed in their beds or died of exposure in the high, snow-choked mountain passes as they fled the violence. Unlike the fortresses of the coast or the stone ruins of the north, Glen Coe has no grand monuments or preserved dwellings. The valley stands exactly as it did 3 centuries ago, its raw earth, biting winter wind, and cold mountain stone, the only remaining markers of the families who perished in the snow. Westward from the silent mountain passes of the mainland, the deep water of the Inner Hebrides leads to islands where history is recorded, not in grand fortifications, but in the quiet survival of communities. On the island of Rousay, the shoreline still bears the faint traces of the 19th century kelp trade, For decades, harvesting seaweed for soda ash provided a vital cash crop for local crofters. When the market collapsed after the Napoleonic Wars, the loss of this trade left families completely vulnerable. By 1841, systematic clearances swept through the island as landlords evicted families to convert the land into large sheep grazing estates, permanently fracturing the population. Yet the cultural identity of these islands survived the forced migrations. The Gaelic language, which carried the oral histories and songs of the displaced crofters, remains a living voice. The 2022 census recorded roughly 58,000 Gaelic speakers across Scotland, representing an ongoing reclamation of community memory that outlasted the landlords. This quiet endurance of community life extends further south to the sacred island of Iona. While millions know the famous abbey, a short walk away lie the pink granite ruins of the Iona Nunnery, an Augustinian convent established shortly after 1203. Known historically as the Black Church because of the dark habits worn by the nuns, this site offers a rare glimpse into the spiritual lives of medieval women. High-quality carvings decorate the ruins, and inside lies the grave slab of Prioress Anna MacLean, who died in 1543. During recent excavations, researchers uncovered an inscribed Celtic cross, a physical link to a female monastic community that sought peace under the protection of St. Columba. These quiet stones and living voices reveal a Scotland of persistent memory, where the true heritage is found in the people who stayed and the culture that refused to fade. The Isle of Skye is experiencing an environmental crisis, where the sheer volume of visitors is transforming Scotland's most celebrated terrains into ecological battlegrounds. At the Old Man of Storr, the Quiraying, and the fairy pools, the surge of foot traffic has carved heavy, muddy scars into the hillside, accelerating severe soil erosion. This is not merely a cosmetic issue, it directly threatens an essential national asset. Over 20% of Scotland's land surface is made of peat soil. These ancient waterlogged bogs act as massive carbon reservoirs, holding an estimated 1.6 to 2 billion tonnes of stored carbon, equivalent to decades of the nation's total greenhouse gas emissions. Yet this climate shield is highly vulnerable. More than 80% of Scotland's peatlands are currently degraded, turning damaged bogs from carbon sinks into active carbon emitters. In response to this environmental threat, the Misty Isle project has launched targeted path interventions. Led by the Outdoor Access Trust, this initiative installs raised timber and steel reinforced boardwalks to lift thousands of daily walkers above the fragile ground. These structures protect the waterlogged mosses from being crushed, allowing the underlying peat and native heather to slowly regenerate. By channeling foot traffic onto these stabilised pathways, the project aims to halt the rapid erosion of alpine slopes and preserve the delicate ecosystems bordering the island's streams. This intervention changes the role of the traveller from a passive observer to an active participant in conservation. Preserving the integrity of these dramatic ridges and pools relies entirely on visitor behaviour, making mindful stewardship an indispensable part of the experience. Westward across the Minch, the edge of the Outer Hebrides reveals a coastline defined by silence and stark light. Here, Luscantire Beach on the Isle of Harris stretches out in a sweeping expanse of powder-white sand and brilliant turquoise water. This striking shoreline is bordered by the March Hare, a rare fertile low-lying grassland formed on ancient marine deposits. It is a highly fragile ecosystem where wildflowers bloom in spring, anchoring dunes that are easily damaged by foot traffic. Preserving this delicate coastal edge relies entirely on visitors sticking to marked pathways and leaving the nesting grasses undisturbed. Further south, the basalt columns of Staffa rise abruptly from the Atlantic, home to the echoing depths of Fingal's Cave. This volcanic island is a sanctuary for marine life, but human access remains strictly dependent on environmental conditions. The island's landing jetty is closed for essential maintenance until June 10th, 2025. This is a reminder that visiting these remote outposts requires restraint and careful planning. From April to August, breeding puffins crowd the sheer rock cliffs, while the waters below harbour dense, swaying kelp forests, vibrant ecosystems showing that Scotland's coastal margins are alive rather than empty. From October to December, the focus shifts to the rocky shores and sheltered coves, where grey seals gather for their peak pupping season. Protecting these vulnerable white-coated pups requires observers to maintain a strict distance of 30 metres. Respecting these boundaries allows the natural rhythm of the Hebrides to continue uninterrupted, showing that the true wonder of Scotland's wild seascapes lies not in conquering the landscape, but in knowing when to step back and let nature exist on its own terms. Today, Scotland's greatest challenge isn't drawing crowds, but protecting the fragile, quiet corners that hold its genuine spirit. As global travel intensifies, the true art of exploration lies in stepping off the beaten path to listen. The country's real magic remains just out of sight, waiting for those who look closer. What hidden corners have you discovered? Let us know in the comments.